Hey, welcome, folks. Another episode of Code to Cloud. Today, I am joined by, say, an esteemed friend slash colleague as well. We've been in the trenches together, but we've also done some great events over the past 6 months. I was very fortunate to be introduced to Todd Wilson from Red Hat. Todd, do you want to just introduce yourself? Tell people what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. And hi, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, my name is Todd Wilson. I lead a group of really awesome solution architects here at Red Hat Canada. And we travel across the country helping people be successful, modernizing and automating and working in the data center, as well as app delivery. So we kind of get exposed to the full soup to nuts spectrum of efforts that are going on across the country. Prior to joining Red Hat, I was a customer of Red Hat. So I actually was on the other side of the fence, and I worked at the government of British Columbia. And there I was helping with the technology transformation in the government data center and helping elevate the capabilities to deliver cloud native applications in BC Gov using open source techniques, not only consuming open source, but creating it. And so there was very interesting journeys and experiences there as well that happy to share.
I mean, we've been talking about platform engineering a lot, right? Recently, and Todd did some amazing work at the government of British Columbia, where he implemented this, right? And that itself is kudos, in a public sector organization, right, where you know um, resources can be limited or mindsets and approaches are different and everything else, right? It's got its own ecosystem going on. Like, again, that's an achievement. So I always say that the private sector has no excuse, because if Todd's managed to do it there, right, then people can do it everywhere. But
Actually, just fun fact,
go for it.
we're coming up on a bit of a celebration for the Kubernetes implementation that we did in BC.
Nice.
Next year is the 10th year for production Kubernetes in the government of British Columbia. And so there have been cloud native apps running in containers in BC for 10 years.
That's crazy, because Kubernetes only turned 10 last 10
Yes.
last year, right?
We were early adopters.
The bleeding edge, right?
Yeah.
And I think that creates a great segue for this episode, right? Because like, if I think back to my career, I've entered organizations. I love living on the bleeding edge, right? I love new tech. I love open source. That's why I'm really, focused on cloud platforms as well, because they're always changing. Now, that's got its own struggles, right, to try and keep up, but I like the innovation and the rate of pace there. Now, it's all, well, good and said. Someone like me comes into the organization, has big, bright ideas, manages to convince the leadership that it's the right way to go, and they sign off on it, right? And implement some cloud native technology, right? Hopefully it's a success. Every day's a learning day, but you get it put in, you're running a service, and you're adding value to the organization. But then you start running into problems, because most organizations don't have a platform engineering team or a DevOps team as yet, right? And there's things that you need to consider, and that's where day two operations come in, right? And there's challenges around that. So how you sustain those implementations and workloads. So from your point of view, Todd, like, I think I called it the guy riding the unicorn in a hurricane, right? That's pretty much, when we come in, right, and do these implementations. But then what are some of the best practices or experiences that you've had that get organizations, I'm going to say comfortable, not ready, but comfortable, right, with this becoming BAU, business as usual, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of things. And again, a lot of them learned the hard way, right? I don't want to try to, I don't want to try to be on this side of the camera and say, yeah, we had it all nailed from the day one, and we knew exactly where we were going to end up, and we knew exactly what we were doing. Newsflash, we had no clue where we were going and what we were doing. I think some key ingredients at the really early stage is you do need to have real clarity on what you're trying to accomplish. And that accomplishment isn't a technology implementation. That accomplishment is either solving a business problem or creating a new capability or improving something that needs to be optimized or sped up or de-risked. So if you come into a modernization effort with a really clear picture of what is it we're really trying to do, you're already kind of one step ahead. I see too many organizations now, that just they throw they throw cloud at a problem, or they throw Kubernetes at a problem, and it's just like, okay, you really, all you've done is do a bit of smoke screen. You've covered up some of the issues, but the core problems are still there. The other thing, so clear finish line, right? You've defined the finish line well. The other thing to be really aware of, and again, it's obvious when you think about it, but today's sort of innovative modernization solution is tomorrow's technical debt, right? And so if you are acutely aware that, like, okay, the thing that we're doing right now, that's going to be somebody else's problem tomorrow, right? That's going to be very quickly technical debt. That cycle is very natural. And so understanding what you're bringing into an organization, how that's going to age, right? How is this going to either open doors or close doors, limit choices, open up choices? There's all sorts of things that these sort of technology decisions have lasting impact. And so we would always call that, kind of our blast radius when we were putting something new in, right? Like, what is the blast radius around this idea? And putting in a container platform and having dev teams work through pipelines and in a DevOps way inside of government, and also have their code open on GitHub and externally available, and people can collaborate on it, and also people can look at it and troll it, and all of the things that happen. We really did not understand the blast radius from day one. And so again, that's kind of a lesson learned, is really kind of take a step back every now and then and go, okay, how big is this going to potentially get, and how many things could it potentially impact?
I completely agree. We're not trying to be skeptic of innovation because it needs to happen. This is a story as old as time, right? In tech, right? It just, as you said, today's innovations, tomorrow's technical debt, right? Or implementation. I think when you really need to look at this is, and this is something I was guilty of in the past. I had this manager, and he was like, you open the Bombay doors and you just fly out, right? And you land. You do land. Problem is, you're normally off the target of where you need to land, right? But you've delivered it, and that's natural. That's going to happen because there's always unforeseen things. But taking it back, that if I'm the only person on the team with that skill set or learning that skill set or have the appetite, then how does my colleague sat next to me or the people on my team going to be able to maintain what I'm implementing as well, right? There are restrictions around that with resourcing and budgets and everything else, but to your point, it's how do you do a skill set analysis? I have this conversation a lot, right? Like, they want to adopt it, but then they don't know how they're going to create a development plan, right, for their employees, right, to even get the basic requisites or knowledge. There's still an emphasis that the vendor is going to take care of everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. And our label for that was is this sustainable by mere mortal devs or by mere mortal ops, right? Because again, I was very fortunate to have a very highly skilled team, and they were able to come up with fantastic solutions. But every now and then we had to kill some of our own young, because a lot of it was like, you know what? I don't think we can make this available because it's going to be, too hard, for people to learn, too difficult to implement, secure, monitor. All of the things start to become, beyond the reach of what we would call like mere mortal people. And by mere mortal, we don't mean that they were less intelligent. By mere mortal, we mean like they're probably on this dev team for a year or less. Their learning curve is going to be very steep for the first 3 to 6 months. And then they're going to be productive and really engaged for 3 to 6 months. And then they're going to roll off and it's going to be somebody else's job. And so there's brief windows of expertise that get developed, and it never reaches kind of that, like, been here for years, know everything about it, I understand how it all works. So folks end up only being able to penetrate the complexity to a certain level. And so, not that they're not capable of going deeper, they just don't have the chance. They don't have the opportunity, the way that the projects run in government, nobody's around that long to get that deep into it. And so that's one of the reasons why we kind of had that mere mortal dev persona, that we realized, okay, in 3 to 6 months, this is how deep that they can get, and this is how much we can expect them to absorb, and this is how productive we can expect them to be. Any longer than that is a bonus.
Yeah, I like that. Immortal devs. I like that persona. One thing that I've seen work is, and this is a path that I've walked, right? So imagine you're in a room full of infrastructure people, and then you tell them that they've got to become a developer.
Yes.
Right.
I've delivered that message. Yes.
I deliver that message now, and they go, you see, like, the rabbit in the headlights, right? Like, I can build networks, I click ops, right? Everything else. And you've come along and said, this is the new right way to do it. And I don't really believe you, and I'm skeptical, right? I may have done some simple scripting in the past, but all those lovely technologies out there like Terraform, right? Or using stuff like Ansible, or, just even writing out a YAML file, or, basic Vim skills, right? Is completely eluded, and you've really got to bring those people on the journey, right? Yep. So as leaders inside your organization, you've really got to think about how you're going to bring those people along, right?
Yes. I don't have a magical answer for that. I
don't.
Yeah. I've seen some things work and I've seen some things fail, right? Expecting people to just jump on the bandwagon and abandon 15 years or so of a career methodology that served them very well, that's foolhardy, right? That's just not going to work. What I have seen work is basic training, almost like a boot camp approach, where you paint the picture for them going in, like, hey, this is a big change, right? But we're here, we've got your back. We're going to put you through some basic training. We're not just going to throw you to the wolves. And by basic training, I mean like literally starting with that YAML file, right? Like, here is a YAML file, right? And this is YAML. And look, here's how you do some basic commands in YAML. And usually that gets, I would say, half the room interested right at that step, right? Like step one, you got half the room kind of leaning in and go, oh, okay, that doesn't seem so intimidating. I can see myself typing out some of those things, and I see how the flow goes. I get it. Next thing we do in the bootcamp is just introduce them to basic Git, right? Like, okay, here's how version control works with that file, right? Check in, check out, all of the things, commit. There's all kinds of what do I want to say? Lingo, right? That's associated with these things, right? Even the concept of a pull request, right? Is
Yeah.
when you actually try to explain a pull request, that's not straightforward. Where on the dev side, there's this mental picture of it instantly, like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Right? Having those things sort of de-risked and de-lingoized as much as you can in a boot camp, I think has worked the best. And so we do sometimes a full week of very rudimentary basic training. Like we'll call it like, GitOps 101, right? And it literally starts with a basic YAML file and trying to explain what a pull request is, right? And then it goes from there.
Yeah, I use the analogy of, when you apply for a job and you go in, they already expect you to know how to use Word, right?
Yep.
They don't ask you in a job interview, can you use Word, right?
No.
Like, not these days anyway.
I was going to say not since 1993, maybe.
Maybe, right? It's like an expectation that you know how to use Word, right? And it's the same with those tools that you've just mentioned, like Git, right? I remember the first time I was doing, somebody's like, right, I'm going to teach you a pull request. And I was like, what is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I'm going to check what you've written is okay. It's a peer check. And then we send it through the cycles, right? And
yep,
eventually gets released to production one day, right? But even then I was like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Had no idea how that process worked. And that was a learning curve for me, right?
Yeah. And it's okay, right? Like it's totally okay to come to these things very green, right? And just for lack of a better word, right? You haven't had the opportunity in your career to touch this. That's fine. That's not a slight on anybody. What I do find is the folks, let's say that 50% that kind of latch onto it really quickly, really all the, like you can almost see the excitement. Like
it's great.
It's almost like you're just like, like that, you're at the dog park and you let your dog off the leash and it runs around and does the zoomies. It's kind of that level of excitement, right? All of a sudden they're like, ooh, I could do a lot with this. Like this will make my job a lot easier. And they can kind of see their mind racing on all of the different opportunities that are available, right? And so to me, that's the feeling I'm trying to capture when, I start talking to more traditional, data center folks about, automation, GitOps and everything as code and, kind of that whole DevOps, journey. If we can get them just to that point where half of them go, oh, this is going to be cool, they'll bring the other half along, right?
I agree. I completely agree. It's something that, win hearts and minds, right? It's definitely a process of doing that, right? Because there's already somebody that's spearheading whatever the technology stack is, right? And they're invested in it. It's how do you then convince the rest of your team, department, if that's going to work? I think, as engineers or architects, that's something that you've got to keep in mind as well when you're coming up with, the next new thing, right?
Yeah.
But
I even want to go back to your assertion, right? Kind of the word analogy is a good one, right? There's even an expectation these days that devs come to the table with, experience in the top 30 or 40, cloud tools, and that they can, master this stuff straight out of the box and just run. And I think that's an unreasonable expectation, right? I think that's putting too much pressure on the dev side as well. Where I saw that in my history most acutely was, we're bringing on devs that are very good at their job. And we're expecting them to understand, how to do deployment configs for Kubernetes when, most of them had never even touched a Kubernetes cluster before, right? And so we're asking them about, commit and limit and, all of the different things for resource configuration and, and work within a special quota and have all of the, pod replication, all of the different concepts that are like, and they're sitting here and they're like, okay, I'm a Python coder. Like, I'm really not sure what you're talking about. It sounds interesting, but can you give me some guidance? And what we found was the learning curve on that is extremely steep, right? And the guidance that comes is mostly a lot of trial and error, right? Like there really isn't
Yeah.
a quick, like, do these four things and you're good. It's like, well, do these four things and then try it again, and then do them again and try it again. So there's a lot of iterative learning that you need to be patient with, and that you need to allow people to take the time to iterate and take the time to experiment and take the time to learn. And one of the things I'm seeing that's a bit of a dysfunction when you see like, we need a cloud native app developer. I mean, you assume that, that person's gonna, they're gonna know Azure, they're gonna know AWS, they're gonna know Google Cloud, they're gonna know Kubernetes, they're gonna know all these things. They have identity management chops. They've got, all of the different, serverless commands ready to rock. They've got AI in their hip pocket and all these. It's like, no, like that's not realistic, right? They're probably good at three or four of those things. The rest of them, they're going to have to figure it out. They're going to have to iterate, and you've got to budget time and space for that to happen.
Yeah, I have this phrase that I use when I'm training people just to put them at ease is, what do I need to know for my job? Right? Because there's a lot of opinions out there on what you... I remember when I entered the whole Kubernetes thing, and I went out to the community and I was like, so what does a simple good cluster look like? And I got like 500 responses.
Yeah.
It was like asking people what their favorite Linux distro was and which one was the best. It was like the worst question I could have asked, right? And I was just like, you've just made this so complicated for me, right? And I just think going back to basics is really important, especially when you're trying to bring people on board.
Yeah. And I find like, analogies are good too for people. The Linux distro one is a good one because people can relate to it. My leadership came up with a great deck that used cars as the analogy.
Nice.
Right. And so everybody's got a different idea of what the best car is, right? For some people, it's a Toyota Corolla, right? For some people, it's a Ferrari Testarossa. Like, very different cars, but it could be the best car for you, right? And so going through the deck of kind of the different cars, we were able to kind of get people having that mental picture of, what we're talking about with the platform, what we bring to the table, why different applications need different things, and what good looks like is a very difficult question to answer. And so the ministry car parking lot was really interesting at BC Gov.
That's hilarious. I like that. I use McDonald's food sometimes as analogies, like Big Macs that you go in, small, medium, and large, right? That seems to work because there's a McDonald's everywhere. But I suppose there's all sorts of kind of weird and wonderful ones that you can use. I kind of like the car one, right?
Yeah, everyone can kind of relate to it, right? And also, there's no right or wrong answer, right? Same thing, like, what's the best Kubernetes cluster look like? Oh, well, there's a lot of ways to slice that.
There is, right? Mm-hmm. So we talked about like technical skill in there a little bit, but let's talk about having the right players at the table. This is something that you think would be obvious, but it really isn't, right? And what do we mean by that? Now, hopefully these players, I like to call them players, right, are at the table at the beginning. Most of the time they're not. So, for example, security, right? They need to be there, right, for day 2 ops, day 1 ops, right? Because it's a continuous evolution, right, of hardening that stack or those processes. Where have you... I mean, I've used security as an example there, but there's, support is another one.
Sure.
Right? What's a support wrapper like this? What are your insights around that?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of I'll tell you the story of how my team evolved over the years, and because I think it shines a light sort of on some of those needs. In the early days, right, very small team, literally, 3 of us, kind of trying to figure out, like I said, that clear problem. So we had clearly defined that problem as government had lost the ability to deliver applications
Right.
cost effectively, right? There's the problem. You take a look at the typical app delivery project in BC Gov, took 2 to 3 years and cost $20 or $30 million. Like it was crazy. And this is for simple little web forms, right? Then you look at what was happening in startup land, right? There's new stuff popping up on the internet every 10 minutes, right? Boom, apps getting created all over the place. And so we knew that there was a better way to do it. To put a team together to try to fix that, right? We didn't presuppose what the solution was. So we decided to try to pull on as many people who understood the problem. So when we would tell that problem to other people, if you kind of we called it the head tilt, you get the dog head tilt, it's like, okay, you don't really understand what we're talking about. If you get the lean in, like, yeah, okay.
I like those social cues.
Yeah.
Right? There's some top advice right there, right?
So in the early days, we took a look at what was going on around, right? And this was sort of the very early days of DevOps, kind of the later days of Agile, right? And those two things together were like, okay, there's something going on here, right? Agile teams have reached a certain stage of maturity, kind of ran into the data center like a brick wall. DevOps is starting to figure out how to get that cadence proper, right? Like between an Agile team and an ops model, how do we get those loops in sync? And so those were our early team members. We were looking at who was trying to work in an Agile way, and in government, we actually found the service design groups. So these would be like the folks who were designing new government services and going out and talking to citizens about, how would you like to receive, government checks, and what would you do in this? So they were doing all of that kind of UX design and UX engagement and all these things. And they were really trying to be, live that Agile dream, live that iterative model. They weren't developers at all, but they were leaning into the problem because they were like, yeah, you know what? We come up with all these great designs, and then we don't hear anything for 2 years. Like nothing. Like we don't get anything. It's like, okay, how do we work on that? So they were part of, we called it in the early days, the coalition of the willing, right? So they
coalition of the willing.
They were willing to go on the ride. Another group, right, would have been another example would have been sort of the data science and statisticians groups. So there's a group that was called Data BC, and again, they were doing all sorts of really innovative stuff with open data and data collaboration, and trying to figure out how to leverage government's data assets in interesting ways to solve problems, running into the same thing. So they jumped on board. It became pretty clear, to your point, your security example, we weren't going to be successful unless we had folks on board that could easily kill us. And so
the Department of No, right?
Exactly.
I used to be a security officer, full disclosure, so I'm allowed to make these comments.
Exactly. So the best way to get past them is to bring them on board as early as possible. Right?
As always, right?
And so, we had a security CISO representative on the team very early stages. We had representation from, the sysadmins very early on, representation from, our Linux admin team and our network admin team very early on. And because we were working in that kind of agile, iterative way, it was very easy for us to then just bring on things like, the kind of transparency. We just kicked open the doors and pretty much had a come in, and if you're interested, join the team approach. In the early days, there was a lot of kind of head tilt more than lean in, right? Folks would kind of come to, let's say, one of our sprint reviews and kind of, I'm not sure what you guys are even talking about. Over time, the lean in got better and better. And those patterns that we set up in the early stages of really having a porous team, allowing folks sort of in and out or to orbit at fairly close orbits, really, I think, helped in the long run. Because one of the dysfunctions that I've seen, and it's hard because a lot of organizations, right, they still have 9 to 5 jobs. They got to keep the lights on. There's all sorts of things that need to be done. They create like what they call either like a center of excellence
Yeah.
or a transformation team or whatever. And it happens in a pocket and they do great stuff, but it's not connected to the rest of the org very well. So most of the time, everybody that's outside of that center of excellence or that transformation team, they just do the head tilt, right? Like, well, that doesn't really impact me, or I'm not really connected to that. Why would I care? Right? As opposed to the lean in. And what we found really early on, by having that borderline as fuzzy as possible between, the transformation team where we were and the rest of the organization, and by pulling people in whenever we could, and making sure that the head tilt was as minimal as possible, right? Like, really started a pattern of getting people on board early. Those, the team of no's were much less resistant because they understood from an early phase that, like, of course we want it to be secure, right? We're not here trying to, create a Swiss cheese security risk for the government. But please bring your expertise to the table because there's probably tons of things you security guys know that we don't, right? And we get us off on the right foot if you're in the room right from the start. And so that pattern, I think, served us very well. Very much an open source community pattern. I mean, that's kind of where we stole the idea from.
Yeah.
Was all of our stuff is open. You don't need to participate, but you're highly encouraged to at least watch.
Yeah, I completely agree. Make sure, I always call it, make sure people are in the landing vessel with you.
Yeah.
You as you storm the beachhead, right? It just improves culture as well.
Yep.
Right? You don't start getting silos or leadership battles, right? Because the transparency is completely there, right? And it really helps.
Yeah, we were transparent to a fault. In some instances, maybe oversharing. But that's, again, I would rather overshare and pull back a little bit than have people be suspicious that you're holding back.
Okay. So I'm just conscious of time. So what would your top 3 takeaways be for folks, right, when they're thinking about this?
Yeah. So especially when you're looking at it from sort of a data center transformation, right? Remembering that it isn't as much of a technology problem as you think, right? It's a sustainability issue, right? It's a scalability issue. The point when you started, right? You bring in some rock stars, they implement some great solutions, and then they instantly start to rust, right? And it's like, okay, that's solved the problem for a couple of months, and it was great, and then it all got rusty and stopped working, and nobody knew how to fix it. So play the long game, I guess, is lesson learned number 1, right? I mean, there's a reason why what we did in BC has lasted 10 years, even though 10 years ago when we started, it was pretty radical. Now it's, to your point, business as usual. And I think that's because we had that sustainability mindset right from the start. The other thing to bring to the table is, in what we were just talking about, is that cross-functional team approach, right? Bring people to the table right from day one. And even if their heads are tilting a lot at the early stages, like, why am I here? I don't think this has anything to do with me. That's okay. Keep inviting them back. The door was always open kind of in our world. And if you weren't coming through the door today, that's fine. Maybe tomorrow. And having that multiple viewpoint, I think, really, again, saved us a lot of times, because there were just so many icebergs out there in the water that we had no clue about until, say, somebody from the network admin team goes, what are you going to do about... And we're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Thank you for sharing that. Can you, explain us a bit more? So then it's thing number 3 is also, keep it fun, right? Like this has the ability to make your workplace and your data center and your day-to-day job really fun, because you're accelerating the delivery, you're accelerating success, you're accelerating people being able to complete tasks and get things out the door, and have that kind of customer joy. We'll use it. Have that be kind of that addictive fuel for the effort that you're doing, and then just let it go and watch it run. It's amazing how people engage and get excited and really start to embrace this as it starts rolling. So that's thing number 3 is keep it fun and keep it engaging.
Yeah, be real about it, right? That's tongue in cheek. I always say, right, it always looks great on paper.
Yeah.
Right, but the practicalities of implementing something or whatever it may be, you're going to face certain things along the way. I think, yeah. So I that was some sterling advice, Todd. Right, I always learn something new. Like I said, sometimes it's like therapy when I speak to you. It's really good. But yeah, I like to finish the show on a quick fire round.
All right.
So ready? Favorite operating system of all time?
You know what? The first one I ever touched was Windows 3.1. So there we go.
For work groups, or was it just?
No, just regular desktop.
Okay, it was a bit before my time. I'm going to be honest there. So I have seen it. I have seen it. Okay. What is it that you most like about working in tech?
I would have to say the optimism. I think there is an inherent optimism in tech that I find addictive. There's always something new, exciting, better, faster. It's amazing to me. Every day I wake up and you read, a new thing that blows your mind. It's fantastic. I love it.
Especially where I work. There's always something new.
Totally.
Always something new. Anything you're looking forward to this year? Any predictions? Anything that you've got your eye on and you're like,
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting year, especially in Canada, right? Like we're off to a bit of a bumpy start.
Well, yes.
There's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's an opportunity for us here in Canada to sort of step up and rise above some of the chaos and pull together in a way maybe that we haven't before. I think, there's a lot of, I'll call it second banana syndrome in Canada, where we just kind of sit back and wait for things to happen. And then we, kind of adopt later. And you take a look at that in tech, right? I would say most of my customers are later adopters rather than early adopters. I think there's an opportunity with, uncertain times for us to shake that a little bit and get our mojo going and start to step ahead and put a Canadian vision forward. I'm hoping.
I really concur to that, right? Like being from a country that likes to do this to themselves a lot, right? Originally, right?
Yep.
We always seem to rise through the pain. And I've seen that with Canadians as well, right? So let's get out there and start, designing and inventing stuff that the world hasn't seen before, right? Like I really, the one thing I've truly experienced being here in Canada is people are open and people are ready to collaborate. So that's a superpower right there, right? Like just run with that at least and start sparking, right? Flick the ignition button. I completely agree with you. Through hard times, right, or uncertainty, it just makes you more resilient in the long term.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I look at this year as a year of really interesting potential. Like, there could be some really good stuff that happens.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I know you're on the social. I know you're on one social for sure, right? But if people want to get more Todd in their life, where's the best place to follow, right?
Yeah, actually, the LinkedIn is pretty much the only one I'm using these days, just because, again, there's only so many hours in the day. So
yeah.
I think it's Todd Wilson _BC. I think is my LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm actually starting a YouTube channel, but it has nothing to do with tech. It's all about sailing. So,
well, Send me a link. I'll put it in the show notes, right?
I
I
will.
mean, I
Yeah.
think everyone's dreams to have a boat at some point, right? Or a
Yeah.
ship,
Yeah, for
especially
sure.
me with my nautical ancestry, right? But yeah, you should. Well, I'll drop that in the show notes. But
For
that
sure.
sounds
Yeah,
amazing.
we'll be posting over the summer. So it's called Middle Fleet, and the idea is to get more people interested in sailboat racing because it's super fun and not that hard.
Kind of like that. So you got like fleet management. You got the nautical theme and Kubernetes, and then you're doing ship sailing as well. I
Yeah.
like the link there. That's awesome. Okay. Well, thanks again, and thanks everyone for listening. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
Bye.
Bye.